this morning, so thank you for the opportunity to share a couple of minutes with you today. I'm going to talk about Amazon and the innovation engine that we think of and that we use internally to power Amazon. And I'm going to talk about that in the context of DevOps at Amazon.com. In 2012, a researcher named Richard Foster at a research analyst firm called Insight did a study of all the firms in the Standard & Poor's 500. What he found was that the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company was shrinking. In 1958, the lifespan was 61 years. In 1980, that had shrunk to 25 years. And in 2012, when Richard had done the study, it shrunk down to 18 years. Now, based on this rate of churn, by the time we get to 2030, 75% of the companies in the S&P 500 today will no longer be there. Think about that. And the answer you ask yourself is why? What's going on that's leading to this churn in the companies that will not be there 15 years from now? And the answer is innovation. A lot of these companies are being disrupted by new business models. And it's a disruption powered by technology. And a lot of it powered by cloud. Think about it. And think about the companies that you know today. In the hoteling space, what Airbnb has done to that industry. In music, when it comes to Spotify. Storage, photos, taxis. And so I want to share our story, our journey, and how Amazon.com has been thinking about innovation. When we started in 1995, this is our first website over there, not the most polished website in the world. But Jeff Bezos had a belief that there was an opportunity for innovation. And if you focus on the customer and use technology to enable a platform of innovation, you could do great things. And so when we think about innovation at Amazon.com, see, innovation is not some singular eureka thing that you achieve and you're done for. It's a process. It's something that we do and put into the very DNA of our company. And we think about innovation not as necessarily this one big revolutionary moment, but as an iterative thing that we work on again and again. And the result of these incremental changes are revolutionary. One example of this incremental innovation is we look at our ebooks. When the first Amazon Kindle came out, relatively black and white, straightforward. And over time, we iterated, we added WhisperSync, and then we came out with the Kindle Fire. So when we think about innovation and how we think about innovation, it's not something that is random. It's not something that just happens. We've actually thought about it a lot, and there's actually a formula for innovation, at least at Amazon. So innovation for us is a function of organizational design and your architecture. And you marry that with the culture and the mechanisms that enable that innovation to happen. And it's around the mechanisms that DevOps really has a big impact. So let me talk briefly about that first. If you want to go down a DevOps path, that doesn't happen in isolation. You really need a culture in your company that enables that innovation. And so for us, at Amazon, we think of our culture in terms of our leadership principles. Now, a lot of organizations have, when they talk about mission statements, they talk about cultures, these are charts that you kind of post up there and everybody looks at it, but nobody really believes it. A culture isn't a culture unless people act on it and they make judgments on that when the boss isn't watching. And so for us, our culture is based on these leadership principles. These are based on things that we truly believe in, and they inform the way. Not only do you see posters of them around the office, they actually inform the way we hire. They inform the way we promote. They inform our day-to-day conversations about the business. Give you an example, right? when we think about, one of our leadership principles is invent and simplify. We don't have a group whose sole mission is to invent and simplify new things. As a matter of fact, we don't have a R&D group, because it is the mission, or it is the responsibility of every employee to find opportunities to invent and simplify in their business. Whether that invention is a better sales process methodology, or whether that invention is looking at how we do our warehousing pipeline and saying, no, we could do that better. Or whether that invention is, hey, there's a great opportunity, let me go out there and do that. And so when you have an entire company, when you have an entire organization that is charged with invention, and it is not the responsibility of a couple of folks at the top, that provides an enormous empowering. It's greatly empowering. But we marry that drive for invention with a responsibility to think deep, to dive deep. And that means when we look at a problem, we're not satisfied with just a surface answer. We dive a little bit deeper, we ask why, and why, and why, until we get to the root cause. And so when you marry those things together, it creates a very powerful culture of a lot of folks in the company that wants to do great things. And then one of the other leadership principles we talk about is the ability to think big, to not just think about your immediate job and what's in front of you, but to think around the bend and think about what is the next great thing. And it's these drives at Amazon that have created things like AWS, that have created things like, hey, let's think about how we do our warehousing a little bit differently and invent Amazon Prime. It's the think big notion that lets us go beyond what we are today. And it's that ability that kind of drives that innovation in the DNA. But culture alone is not enough. You can have a lot of very motivated folks who want to do great things, who want to invent, who want to think big, who want to really understand the root cause of every problem. But if you put them to the wrong organizational structure, it is demoralizing. A lot of companies today are built on an industrial organizational structure, a structure that really was created in the American Civil War days in the 1860s. It's built on this notion that, hey, the person at the very top of the chain has the best information. Information rolls up, decision making gets done at the top, and execution rolls down. This does not work in an innovation company. And so at Amazon, we organizationally create what we call two-pizza teams. And the notion behind a two-pizza team is, you should have a team with an assigned area of responsibility that is bigger than what you can feed with two pizzas. That can vary according, of course, to the appetite of the team, about how big that team is. But typically, 6 to 8 folks. And the idea is that you give full ownership to that team. They have the responsibility, and they have the ownership and the accountability, and so you assign the responsibility. You give them the incentive, you also enable them to execute on it. And that is what we think about as a DevOps organization structure. So for instance, at Amazon Web Services, the EC2 is its own team. The folks that write the EC2 software is also responsible. If that thing breaks, they have folks on call and they rotate it through. It's amazing what happens when you're a developer and you're responsible for answering the pager call when your software breaks. So we have these two pizza teams that enable us to move fast and be agile. So organizational culture, organizational structure is important. And the next thing is, of course, the architecture. This is the architecture of Amazon.com around 1990. Now, folks don't go out and say, I'm going to create a big monolithic structure. What happens is you're a startup. When you are a startup, you don't have many teams. You've got a small team, and things just grow and grow and grow. And all this, and you make choices at the beginning because, hey, we want to move fast. Well, do we want to set up all these multiple teams? No. We want to make sure we go fast. And what happened, by the time we got to 1999, Amazon was about 5 years old back then. And so we had a very big monolithic architecture that looked like this. So you had many development teams but you have one big massive app that controlled basically the Amazon.com platform. And it was very difficult to start updating stuff. We started to run into our own scale. And we found out that the ability of our teams to move fast began to slow down by this architecture. We had this big, giant database that controlled all the customer information, and we ran into scaling issues. So around that time, one of the things that we really believed in, and we made a transformation in the architecture of the company, was we started breaking that architecture into pieces, into functional pieces. Today, if you go to Amazon.com, you're actually interacting with about 200, 300 different microservices, different services. There's a service for the recommendation engine. There's a service that pulls together the actual picture of the item that you're looking at. There's a service for the shopping cart. And there's yet a different service that provides, that tells you, hey, this item is available or not into the warehouse. So the ability to break it off into microservices has actually been very powerful, because now instead of having this one big monolithic architecture, we had different teams that could work on different components, things that they would own. And so this picture is roughly a few years old, but these are all the different services existing within the Amazon.com platform. We went to a service-oriented architecture. We went to microservices, and it's a loosely coupled system. Now, this picture looks a little bit scary. It's this jumbled ball of things, right? It's a representation of all the services that we're using today. But what we found out, what we discovered through this process, was loosely coupled services actually enable agility, right? I can make a change. I can substitute a service over here without affecting the rest of the organization, because the API stayed the same. So why is this important? Why is this different? Well, use an example, right? If I wanted to go out and build a new mobile application, I don't have to start from scratch. I can use an already existing service that reads barcode information and translates that to product information. I can use an existing service that tells me when that product is available. I can use an existing services in the back end. And so right away, I have the ability to really build new applications by leveraging existing service. And that's, and if you think about it, this provides enormous agility to the organization, because you don't have to start from scratch. You can leverage an existing service as a foundation to build new services, a higher level services on top of it. And that's what gives you speed. That's what gives you agility. And we also found out that if you use a microservices architecture, actually they scale bigger. They move faster. Because I don't have to go back there if I want to leverage a new service, right? I don't have to go there and sit into a change control board meeting and say, I want to do this. Does anybody have any objections? Because the services have an external hardened API. So we talked about organizational, we talked about architecture, we talked about culture, and now we get to mechanisms. Because all these things, and now we get to how DevOps fits into this framework. Because all these things are great, but without the right mechanisms, you're going to be slowed down. So what are mechanisms? Mechanisms can come in the form of tools. Mechanisms can come in the form of processes that you use. So what's an example of a mechanism? Well, a number of years ago at our customer call centers, as we do senior leaders, Jeff Bezos actually sat with a call center agent, and what he found out was, talked to call center agent, and call center agent says, yep, this item popped up, it's probably a call for a return. And Bezos says, well, that's interesting. And then another customer called, it was the same item, yeah, this customer's going to call and ask for a refund or return on this item. And Jeff said, well, how do you know that? And she said, well, because I've been seeing it over and over again. So, Jeff goes up to his leadership team meeting and says, we got to fix this. Too many returns are unacceptable. Go fix this. Quarter goes by, nothing happens. Why? Because the first approach was, hey, go fix it. Right? You're relying on people You're relying on people to work harder, to do better. And you kind of assume that, well, this is not working because people aren't trying hard enough. But that's not really a good answer. You actually have to, assume that if they're working for you, people have good intentions. They want to work hard. They want to do well. But the mechanism wasn't there. And so what we instituted in the way of a mechanism was something called an and-on chord. Now, and-on chord is a term that comes from the Toyota manufacturing practice. And basically, if in the Toyota plant, if there is a defect that runs down the production plant, any worker has the ability to pull a cord and stop the production line, which is a big deal. But the idea behind Toyota pioneered is that it's easier to fix a problem upstream than to let something go down downstream. And so, in that particular example, the and-on chord that we instituted was the ability for a call center agent to basically pull a product from the website, or say the product is not available because of this particular issue. And of course, that gets everybody interested, escalated. But by giving that power to a call center agent on a customer service, because that person at the front line, is the first person to see all these issues, that's a mechanism to fix the issue of all these returns that we're seeing because of, in that particular case, bad packaging. And so we worked with the manufacturer. We told them, hey, you gotta improve your packaging, and so that item was a particular table was fixed. And so, in the context of development in your organization, we think about DevOps as a mechanism to have that agility, to enable innovation within the organization. We talked about breaking it off organizationally into these two pizza teams. We talked about microservices that broken down, but there's still a problem that we encountered when we did that. And that was great. We talked about hiring folks that have an incentive to be innovative, to think creatively. The problem was in our delivery pipeline. And we couldn't use the same delivery pipeline that we had if we went to this architecture. So what do we do? Because now we had a lot of teams updating releases really quickly. Well, the first thing we did was we actually created a tools group within Amazon.com. And the role of this tools group was to provide tools that the different developers could leverage and use. And we had several guiding principles behind this development. First was that these tools that we provide had to be self-service. There was no way with that many small teams now pushing updates that we can have a centralized control release organization managing all. They would actually become a barrier and get in the way. And so we created tools that they can leverage on a self-service basis. And these tools that they leverage had to be technology agnostic, because one of the things that by empowering the team to go out there and figure out by owning the services, we're basically telling the team, well, you choose the technology platform that you want to use. Do what works for your team. And so the tooling to support that had to be technology agnostic. Customers could use Windows, the service teams could use Linux, had to be technology agnostic that way. They could use Oracle database, they could support MySQL. We did not want to mandate what tooling they had to use because, well, there needs some creativity there. And the other thing that we found out, the tools team found that was, we also, as we had these different teams going out there and innovating, we wanted to bring back to everybody what the best practices were. And the best way to capture that best practices was actually bake it into the tools, so that the tools are right there in terms of, hey, here's a best practice. And I'll talk about an example of what I mean in some of that. And the tooling team also said, hey, embrace the microservices thought, and so the various tools that they had were single purpose tools. You didn't create one massive deployment tool to rule them all. It was various components, and the teams could choose what tools that they use. So what were some of those tools that we developed? Well, one was a tool that we developed internally called Apollo, and it was actually a deployment service. So think about this: we had a large web service, a large online operation, lots of changes going out there. We had to have a way that these deployments could be rolled out and rolled out quickly. So Apollo was a tool that Amazon.com and Amazon Web Services uses to roll out the changes in the code. And the way Apollo worked was it would roll out changes incrementally. So instead of rolling out everything at once, it would roll out to a certain cluster or a certain node. And if there's anything wrong with that, we did some automated checks, it would roll out to the next node. And the idea here is that then, as part of the Apollo rollout tool, have no downtime. And also we built into that tooling mechanisms to do health checking so that if an automated health check failed, there's the ability there to version the rollout, to have the code versioning and roll back to the previous version. And that was great, and that was wonderful, and it sped things up. But we also did analysis internally of, well, how fast did it take us, even with this DevOps methodology, even with the growth, even with the teams and the microservices and Apollo, we found out it was actually still taking us weeks to roll out changes. And so we dug into that. And what we found out was it wasn't the actual change, it wasn't the actual automated testing itself that was taking weeks that had led up to this delay. When we dug into what was causing this lengthening of the cycle time in terms of the rollout, we found out that was actually somebody, you get the email and it was somebody else in another organization waiting for that email, or actually not waiting, getting to that email and taking the next step. And then, and then they kind of put out that process to somebody else over in quality, Q&A, and it's like, okay, now it's time to actually push the button on Apollo. And that was taking a while. And that just drove us crazy. Because remember, this is Amazon.com. For a company that believes in automation, for a company that has, that has this vision of drones delivering your packages and automated their process, the fact that this wasn't automated, was something that we had to fix. And so we developed a tool for continuous delivery so that our users can map out what their entire development release cycle process was and automate those processes and find ways, the automation, yes, could be an email and having a timer when somebody doesn't reply to escalate that up, or it could be, hey, there's a testing QA process that needs to go on, so let's go ahead and automate that process because you don't really need a person to say yes, they just need to run an automated check. And so the result was, at Amazon.com, this type of development cycles. Lots of two-pizza teams, using the microservices, using these tools to build out their build, test, and release environment. And of course, being AWS, being Amazon.com, we actually took some of these tools and we externalized it. So code commit is, we took our learnings from Apollo, and code commit is sort of a repository for your code. Code pipeline is that pipeline process that lets you kind of map out your release process and automate as much as possible. And AWS Code Deploy was what we took Apollo and allows you to deploy, do that deployment process. And and this is basically how it fits together. We've taken some of these tools and we made it available for our customers because we saw, hey, there could be benefit there too. So what does that mean, and what does that mean for you? This is Amazon.com's process. This is our methodology. These are the things that we've used internally to help us move fast. And this is our formula for innovation at Amazon. You need to have a strong culture that believes in innovation. And that begins with how you hire, how you promote, and how you think about the business. You need to have an organizational structure that supports agility, that is not top-down and control, but enables folks to be able to have responsibility as well as the empowerment to act independently. And then you need to have an architecture that enables that from an IT back-end process point of view. And then just as importantly, you need to have the mechanisms, whether that's a process mechanism or whether that's tooling that enables your organization to go fast and innovate fast. So put all those things together, and Amazon.com has about 50 million deployments a year. That's an average of 1.5 deployment every second. What does that mean from a business standpoint? It's an incredible rate of innovation. So that as the company gets bigger and bigger, innovation actually increases. The amount of product releases actually increases instead of slowing down. That's an incredible competitive advantage. In 2011, we had 82 new releases from AWS. These are new products, major releases. In 2014, we had 516. And if you look at the types of services that were released over time, new products, new offerings, and even with existing offerings, incremental improvements based on customer feedback. What does that mean for you? Well, as another data point, in 2004, when Amazon.com was a $7 billion business. Today, it's close to $100 billion. But today, in 2015, Amazon.com adds enough server capacity every single day to support that $7 billion business. And that's an incredible rate of growth, enabled by innovation. So what does that mean for you today? And what does that mean for your business? Innovation is an enabler. Your IT organization can be an enabler for innovation. Conversely, if it isn't, you are at a drastic competitive disadvantage. And we've seen it happening in terms of customers taking advantage of that to change their existing relationship with their customers. We see that in terms of improving their internal process to be faster, whether it's Bristol-Myers Squibb using the technology to reduce the cycle time of how fast they put drugs out in the market. And also companies being able to create an entirely new value proposition, entire new business models. And for us, the exciting thing is, we still believe it's day one. We still believe, and when we say it's day one, it's the start of a new day. There's so many possibilities out there. So thank you for letting me share our journey and story.